Welcome to Dyscastia, a podcast for parents and teachers about the best way to support kids living with learning difficulties. My name's Michael Shanahan.
And my name's Michael Shanahan.
Oh.
No, it's Phil Hansberry. And we are, number one, like always, we're podcasting to you from the lands of the Kaurna people. And we, like always, want to acknowledge their deep connection to the land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge, unfortunately, that dispossession and colonisation are both ongoing processes.
Thank you, Bill. And today we are talking about maths. We're talking about maths in terms of learning difficulties, in particular dyscalculia, but also dysgraphia and dyslexia can have impact on ability to do maths. And we're talking with Liana McCurry.
Can I introduce Liana?
You can introduce Liana.
Oh my gosh. Well, we are sitting across from greatness. Don't laugh, Liana. You know how good you are. But you're very humble about it. Liana, we're at Salisbury Primary School. And Liana, what do you do here besides bring your greatness?
I am the assistant principal of curriculum, basically,
yes.
In a nutshell.
And Liana and I go a while back, don't we, Liana? When did we first bump into each other?
Oh gosh, I think through our good friend Shani Jamison.
That's right.
Yes.
That's the wonderful Shani Jamison.
Shani, and we did go to Bentley West.
We did. That's right.
Back in 2019.
That's right. And you've come along and done some TSD with us.
I have done TSD 1 and 2, and I'm planning on doing 3 next year.
Excellent. And Liana, you excel in the literacy space and the morphology space, and to use a dancing, singing, acting metaphor, you are the triple threat because you are quite the teacher in maths as well, and you're about to head off and do on a Churchill Fellowship trip in September. Tell us about it.
So I have been awarded a Churchill Fellowship that I will undertake in September. I'm very excited about it. So my project submission was around best practices in maths, and my focus is on countries who have performed consistently well within the PISA assessment. So the countries I'll be visiting, I'm going to Singapore and Japan to start with. And then what people find most interesting is, so where all the countries are ranked according to their results, the top 6 or 7 countries are Asian countries or provinces of Asia. And the first non-Asian country on the list is Estonia.
The dark horse.
So Estonia is doing some wonderful things in education. So I'm visiting Estonia. I'm also going to Finland. Finland, interestingly, is dropping at a rate equal to Australia.
Yes.
However, they did do a big overhaul of their education system. So I'm still very interested in seeing what is going on there. And then after that, heading over to Vancouver, because Canada is the first predominantly English-speaking country on the list on the PISA assessment, and they come in at number 12. And then I head to Hawaii to go visit Mr. Ron Yoshimoto. He won't actually be there, but he has put me in touch with a number of schools to visit. So there is a Montessori primary school and another school doing some wonderful things. They've all been trained in OG literacy, and they take that focus across to maths as well. So
wow, how exciting. So
it's very exciting.
For people who might not know, what is a Churchill Fellowship?
Okay, so a Churchill Fellowship, most people haven't heard of a Churchill Fellowship. So there are lots of different categories. It's not just education based. Anything that you have an interest in or an area that you work in. If you have a project idea, the idea is that you've exhausted your opportunities here in Australia, and they will fund you to go overseas to research that project idea further. And then when you come back, you write a research paper that then gets published.
Oh, brilliant.
There you go.
And another thing is PISA. What's PISA?
PISA, that's a wonderful question. So it's a standardized test, basically. It happens for 15-year-olds across OECD countries. So I think there are about 81 countries involved. And so 15-year-olds from across a range of educational settings. So it doesn't matter department levels. So it happens every 3 years. And in 2018 was the last one. There were 1,000 South Australian students who sat the PISA assessment, and there is a focus. So they focus on obviously the reading, maths and science.
Okay, so that's quite a significant sample.
It is.
Just for South Australia.
Yes.
And I heard you mention in there that Australia's been going backwards in that. Is that correct?
Yes. So PISA assessments start in 2000. So in 2003, we ranked 10th overall in the world.
Is this just for maths or overall?
Overall.
Yep.
In 2018, we ranked 30th. Now, that is a significant difference, obviously. And the other thing is there are more countries involved, but still, a slip of 20 countries is a big concern.
Do you think – sorry, Bill.
Yes.
Do you think it's because we've got worse or other countries have got better? Or is that what you're wanting to find out?
Good question.
That's what I'm hoping to find out. So I'm hoping to find out what they're using, what their instructional practice looks like, what assessments look like, what professional development looks like. I will make a bit of a big claim at the moment
Go
as
on,
well.
do it, Liana. Do it. We're into big claims here on Discastia.
I know in South Australia, and so I don't know Australia-wide what other curriculums look like. I mean, we use the Australian curriculum now, but in 2001, SACSA was introduced. SACSA is a constructivist curriculum.
Boo.
It was very much about the knowledge that children bring. So it was perpetuating the Matthew effect.
Yes.
And I think that the ongoing, the prolonged results of that have maybe come out of that, because I feel that was a very big idea in education.
Yes,
we need to acknowledge the prior knowledge that they're bringing. We need to do a lot of collaboration, a lot of talking, whereas the teacher was the facilitator more than teacher-led classrooms.
I'm just dying to say something. I've just listened to Ollie Lovell interview Ben Jensen.
Great
right?
podcast.
Yeah, about Australian curriculum for the second time. And you've mentioned the same countries that Ben Jensen mentioned. And the backwards slide of Finland moving away from a knowledge-based to a skills-based curriculum.
Yes.
Is featured in that. Now, where was I headed with this? So, yes, cycles of disadvantage and educational disadvantage. So, skills-based curriculum and the whole idea around constructivism and building on what students bring, students don't bring the same amount with them.
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
So, we're starting to realise that we've got to do better.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have to, education is the greatest gift that we can give to children, and we have to level the playing field. So we have to, I follow a explicit direct instruction, an EDI approach where we teach first.
Yes.
That is the first rule of EDI. We teach first. We don't stand in front of a class and say, who can tell me about this? Because that's unfair to the children. It's unfair to the children who, go to homes where they don't get to go out to museums or go on holidays or, have that level
background knowledge
at home. Yeah. So
teach first. Everyone's grizzling about the educational disadvantage gap opening in Australia. I think we might have a big part of the solution. Teach first, teach well. There's our big claim, Leanne. I'm backing my big claim off your big claim. But.
Okay, so with literacy, we've got this tiered system where it's tier 1, 2, 3, where, tier 1, general classroom instruction, everyone gets the same thing, a little bit of differentiation. Tier 2, kids who are struggling, you might take them into small groups and do a bit more intensive work. Tier 3 is one-on-one or one-on-two.
Really intensive.
Intensive intervention.
Highly skilled teacher.
Yep, and usually kids who live with dyslexia, dyscalculia, but, if we talk just about dyslexia, dysgraphia, I think the system is not great. But it's getting better, and those kids are getting identified and getting the support they need.
Well, that's right. Schools are just getting their head around response to intervention, aren't they?
But I wonder where that's at with maths. And so one of my first thoughts was, is there a similar tier approach to maths? And how are these kids identified, and what kind of intervention do they get or should they be getting around maths?
Yeah, so I would say
I know it's a big question.
It's a big question. I would say the idea of the tiers, yes. So you've got your tier 1, your tier 2 would be what a classroom teacher can manage to do within the classroom. I haven't seen a tiered solution to maths in the same way that it's run in literacy. I think so much of the focus in education over recent years has been literacy, which is absolutely where it needed to be. But we do need to shift a focus into maths once people have, literacy, or they're on the right path,
Yeah.
I guess, for where they're going for literacy, and to have a look at our Tier 1 teaching of maths and then what Tier 2 and Tier 3 could or should look like.
So it's a bit behind, isn't it?
It is. I think it's quite
Yeah.
behind.
I mean,
So
I
why?
totally get the triaging
Yeah.
of literacy,
Yes.
you know, because you need literacy to do maths.
Absolutely.
Basically. So it's a
literacy-
real starting point.
Yeah, improvements in literacy is shown to improve maths results as well because
figure.
maths is so vocab based.
Yep.
You know, it's all about language.
Yeah.
Yep.
But sorry, Bill, what were you going to say?
I was going to go, well, why? Why don't we think about, well, why are we a bit slower to think about a 3-tiered model of intervention for maths? What is there something in the culture? Do we expect some people just to get maths and some people not to get it?
I think that there are a number of things. First of all, I don't know that there's a whole lot of readily available good quality professional development for teachers to access. But I also think, and I know that we've spoken about this before, it's more acceptable to say, oh, well, I'm not a maths person.
Yeah.
I was at LGU training recently and I was in the dyslexia course. And
This is the South Australian
the
Literacy
South Australian
Guarantee
Literacy
Unit.
Guarantee
Yeah.
Unit.
Gotcha.
Sorry,
you're good.
department. I just talk in acronyms, sorry. And, you know, she was saying if you go out to dinner, it's very common you get the bill, you just hand it to the maths person.
Yeah.
But you can't turn around and say, oh, can you read this menu for me? Because I can't read.
Yeah.
So it's more acceptable to
Yeah.
be not good at maths. You just go, oh, I'm not a maths person. And we form that opinion of ourselves very young.
Yeah.
You can say to children, like, how do you feel about maths? They will tell you straight away, I hate maths.
Yeah.
Don't like it.
Yeah.
So we form that opinion so early and then it's ingrained. But it's more culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
So, and I think that you're either someone, as a teacher, again, either you enjoy teaching maths or you don't. And if you don't enjoy teaching maths or you don't feel confident, then you're going to teach literacy more.
Yep.
And if something you don't have time to fit everything in your day, maths will go over literacy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So it's really neglected, isn't it?
I think so.
And it's a bit sad because maths is part of everyday life.
Absolutely.
And the psychological impact on kids is just as great.
Yeah.
Perhaps even more so in some circumstances because kids who really struggle.
Yeah.
Really.
And, you know, maths is such a mystery to them.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
And I see them, you know, I definitely think the kids that I see for maths intervention are on the whole older than kids for literacy intervention because I think it takes longer until it becomes, you know, obvious that they need some support, which kind of makes it harder because now their sort of self-concept around maths is is very difficult to turn around and they develop a lot of maths anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did. I cried every year 5 lesson.
Yeah. And
I was a bit of a sook, but I did.
And you've also got, because by the time you hit upper primary, if your number concepts aren't solid, you're going to be very lost.
That was my issue.
Because
Yeah.
everything, you know, hinders on you having that knowledge for you to move on. You know, if you don't have knowledge of multiplication and basic 4 operations, then you can't do fractions and decimals and percentages.
Yeah.
And you're just looking at these abstract concepts that actually make no sense to you whatsoever.
Right.
And then by the time we get to year 5, a lot more of the curriculum is based around the measurement and geometry aspect, and there's a lot of spatial awareness.
Yeah.
And so if you are someone who struggles with that visualization, then you're going to struggle with a lot of the curriculum as well. So, you know, not only are you struggling with the number aspect, but then you're also struggling with the measurement and geometry aspect.
Okay.
So you're struggling.
there's a lot to maths, isn't there?
There's a lot
There
to
is.
maths.
You know, there's time, there's money, there's
Yes.
percentages, there's probability. Like, that's what I was saying before. There's a huge amount of stuff
Algebra.
in the curriculum
Yeah.
for kids to get their head around.
Yes.
And so let's think about that for a sec. You know, I'm working in a school as a teacher, and perhaps maths isn't my strength. There is a lot of support and structure around literacy. There are lots of programs available. You know, yes, you have to choose the right program, but it sounds to me like there isn't that network of support around maths.
Yes.
And so if you're a teacher in a school, you're not feeling confident yourself with maths, You've got kids in your class who are struggling. What do you do?
Great question.
How do you support those kids?
Yes.
If there isn't that infrastructure in place?
So I would say Thinking Forward Educators has a maths network with some great webinars, podcasts to get you started. I would absolutely go there. But I think all teachers should be trained in explicit direct instruction.
Yep.
It is absolutely the way that we need to go because it works. It's a lesson structure. So that's number one, is your lesson structure needs to be organised.
Yep.
And then I'm very, very fortunate. I'm within a school that has complete consistency whole school wide.
Oh, let's just actually plug where we are.
Yeah.
This is Salisbury Primary School in South Australia, people. Centre of excellence in all things teaching and learning. And it's no coincidence that people like Liana end up here. So, and we run study tours here. This is how good this place is. But anyway, I just had to get that plug in. I felt obliged.
Yes, yes.
And so you're in a well-functioning school.
I'm in a very, very highly functional.
And so what sort of support networks do you have around this?
Yeah, so as the assistant principal, one of the reasons that I was brought in was for my maths knowledge. And so I have developed over the last few years whole school scope and sequences, so that breaks down what to teach when, so that it's progressive and developmental. And also, because I think it's really important. I know when I was in the classroom and I had year ones, and I was doing a master's degree in maths. And so what that forced me to do was read a lot of the research, which was great. And it tied in when I went to Bentley West, which was wonderful. And I spoke to Stephen Capp, the principal there, and he put me on the path of cognitive load and John Sweller's book.
Yep.
And, you know, when I read that, because when you do a lot of the research around maths, they'll tell you that a lesson should have 3 parts. One is your opening, your main part of your lesson, your teaching, and then a closing. And for me, I was like, that's great, but that's not enough.
That's loose.
That's very loose.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does it look like? What do I do? And then
opening the book, reading the book, closing the book.
And
okay, children, book is open.
So I was like, well, you know, I need more than that. And then, you know, going to Bentley West, so I had to read the EDI book as well. And when I read that, I was like, oh, well, this is it. This is exactly what I want. And so from there, I was in a very, very supportive team. Shout out to my team back then because we did so much together. And so I could plan maths and they would all implement it and we all took different areas. So I could focus solely on doing that. And that's something this school does really well, is that team planning.
Yes.
So it means that you can focus on something that you're interested in and plan it well, because we know, especially as primary school teachers, you can't cover everything. So you need to focus, you know, where's your attention going to go?
Yeah, where's the best bang for buck?
Exactly.
And team planning is so important. Collective teacher efficacy,
Absolutely.
effect size, huge.
Yes.
It's up there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So and John had his work, you know, the 10 most effective high impact teaching strategies, EDI.
Yeah.
Like they're all 10 strategies are within an EDI lesson.
And EDI is I'm doing another deep dive into Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction, and you just see it right through any good direct instruction model.
Yes.
You see that stuff, and oh my gosh, it's just such common sense. So all right, the components of a math lesson. So if beginning, middle and end isn't enough,
No.
what are we talking about here?
Absolutely. So in EDI, you've got 7 lesson components. It's very, very specific. So you start with activating prior knowledge. So I always say to people, you know, you may have taught a lesson on fractions. It went really well. Kids were engaged. Fabulous. You come back the next day and you're like, who can tell me about what we did yesterday? Maybe in their day, your fractions lesson wasn't the most exciting thing that happened. I know it's very painful for us to think about as teachers, but, you know, maybe the kids had soccer practice. Maybe they had an argument with a sibling, you know. You don't know what's happened in their lives, and they come back the next day, and how many times do you get, I don't know.
Yep.
You know, so that's why we come back to teach first.
Hey, Liana,
So-
okay, just give us the morphology of the word fraction, will you?
Oh, fraction. Fract means to break.
Yeah.
So. ION is an active state of result of. So.
Sorry, couldn't help it.
Fraction is the result of breaking.
Broken numbers.
Mm.
Okay.
Fracture is always my
Stop it.
why.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's keep-
But
Liana and I do
equal
this.
fractures, though. Is this weird equal fracture?
absolutely.
It's an equal fracture.
Yeah, it's gonna be an
Yeah.
equal fracture.
Yes. So, so that's the thing. So they come back and you are not, you weren't the most exciting part of their day. So we have to review, and based on Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve
Yeah.
that we know really well, and we know cognitive load, we know that learning is not retained unless it's reviewed over
Correct.
and over and over again. And when you think that, they've had enough, keep going.
Yes.
That is probably the biggest thing I can tell people is review.
We want overlearning.
We
Yes.
because we want to develop the automaticity.
Absolutely.
So
Oh.
when they're faced with a problem,
Yes.
they're not having to use all that brain
Yes.
power to work out what this question means
Yes.
because the language is difficult. It's
Yes.
using, and those examiners always throw in that
The
curly
wobbly,
language,
the curly one.
the obscure term to talk
Yeah.
about
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
And so you got to get that automatic. So
Chunked and automated,
that,
Mr.
so they've got
Shanahan.
enough free brain power.
Yes.
And that's what that repetition and automation does.
Absolutely. And, it comes back to cognitive load and working memory. So for our children who have poor working memory, they need more repetitions
Yes.
than a child who has a better working memory. So we go over and over. And I always say to people, your review could take 3 to 5 minutes of your lesson. It could take 20 minutes. Always be guided by what your children need.
Yeah.
Mm.
So when I taught year ones, we counted to and from 120 each day. So I needed them to understand, because a lot of the times in year one, you get kids who can rote count to 100,
Yep.
but they actually don't understand pattern happening in numbers. They don't understand the quantities of those numbers.
Mm.
And they go to 100, and when you ask them to write 101, they'll write 1001
Yep.
Yeah.
because they don't understand place value.
Yes.
So that is rote learning.
Yep.
Yep.
What we want is conceptual understanding.
Mm.
Yep.
And that's the difference. There's a big difference when we say surface learning. People think that surface learning is rote learning. It's not actually. It's good conceptual understanding.
Mm.
And
Yes.
you cannot move to deep learning or transfer of learning unless you have really solid surface learning.
That's right. And it's the surface learning that chunks and automates those lower level tasks,
Yes.
puts them in long-term memory. So
Yeah.
when they come back into working memory, they don't take up as much space.
Exactly.
They don't need the conscious effort to be thought of and held.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so do you think maybe sometimes that's lost and we just do the surface learning repetition? I see kids who know their times tables.
Yes.
They have no idea what it actually means.
Yes.
They have no idea what they're doing. It's just a random bunch of
Yes.
facts that they can rattle off because they've learnt it. And then as soon as you give them, say, a multiplication problem that perhaps doesn't use numbers or,
Yeah. A
throws,
non-standard.
a non-standard thing where they have to think about it and use that kind of multiplicative
Multiplicative thinking.
multiplicative
Yes.
thinking.
Click means
They
to
fall
fold.
apart. They fall apart. Is
Couldn't
that
help
what
it.
you're talking about? Is it?
Yes.
Is it not so much repetition of facts,
Yes.
although that's part of it, but it's repetition of concept?
Concept.
It's constantly getting them to think in a
Yes.
conceptual way.
Yes.
That's what you're repeating.
Absolutely.
Not the fact, not the end result.
No.
No.
And the other thing is your review is once a topic or concept has been taught.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not yet like, okay, here's your multiplication facts. We're just going to rattle them off. It is, I have explicitly taught you what multiplication is. Here is how it works. Here's how we visualize it. Now that you have a conceptual understanding, now we can review.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And because when we're talking about multiplication facts as well, you're talking about the equation. You probably see in your mind, 4 times 3 equals 12. But that's the abstract concept.
Yes.
So when we're teaching a concept, so again, I'm very fortunate to be in a school that has a whole school approach. I sourced and ordered manipulatives for the whole school.
Yep.
So every class has sets of manipulatives, and there's enough for a set for for each 2 children.
Yep.
So each pair of children have a set of manipulatives that they use. When we introduce a concept, we use the manipulatives. So we follow the CRA approach, which is the multisensory approach, which is we use the concept, the concrete materials to introduce the concept, get that conceptual understanding. Once that is done, we move to a visual representation. And if people don't know the bar model of
Singapore
maths,
bar, yeah.
Singapore bar, best thing that we can do because that applies to so many things. But the visual representation is of your manipulatives.
Yep.
And then finally we move to the abstract concept, because often in maths we move to the abstract concept far too quickly.
And skip the middle?
And skip the middle. The visual, absolutely skip the visual representation, but without that conceptual understanding.
Yep.
So, and that's what you're saying. We can go through the motions and we can do the abstract concept. And that was me as a child.
Yes.
I was very good at maths.
Yep.
And particularly, you know, I always think, because I didn't learn this until I was an adult because I'd never had to think about it, but subtraction. I could do all of the abstract concept, was very good at it, you know, enjoyed maths a lot. It was my favorite subject. But I didn't understand that when I was crossing a number out and writing a number and moving a number over, that I was actually taking 10 units from the next column and moving it over. So I couldn't explain it to you.
Neither could I.
And so, and you would have found this when we did the Ron Yoshimoto maths last year.
Which you held my hand all the way through, Liana. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. But, you know, as adults, we can do that abstract concept. But when you have to use the manipulatives, I ran a multisensory maths session the other day with a school. To go back and explain what you're doing is really difficult because you can think to yourself, oh, I know I crossed that number out. I write this number here. But to actually break it down when you're using the manipulatives and to go, oh, well, actually, I'm taking 10 from here and moving it over here, to have to explain that. And, you know, I said to them, so like, how does a child feel? You know, sometimes you have to put yourself, and Bill, you did a great job of doing this in the training, putting yourself in the mind of a student and going, oh, well, how do I explain this step by step?
I didn't have to work hard.
Because it's hard.
Yeah,
I'm struggling.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And I think that's where a lot of teachers struggle as well, because if you're only looking at your year level and your year level's curriculum, you're not sure like what they've come from or what they're going to. You're also not looking at you know, let me try that again. So if you're only looking at your year level and not the year level they've come from, the year level that they're going to, you're only focused on that one year level, then you're not really understanding what they should have.
Yeah.
And you're just expecting that they have that knowledge.
Yeah.
So they're coming to you and you go, okay, this is just assumed they've got this, so I can move on.
They've done place value, they've done this, they've done that, so I just teach this next bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do if they don't?
Yeah.
And that becomes the question. I think the higher up you go, because the teachers go, well, I need to do fractions to decimals to percentages, but they don't have the base level number knowledge. But I'm an upper primary teacher, high school teacher. I don't know how to teach that because that's junior primary concept.
And I have the curse of the expert.
Yeah.
You know, so what do you do if a child doesn't understand? Do teachers have enough knowledge to be able to break down the concept and build it back up? So I think that, and see, that's where I think your professional development probably needs to come in to make teachers comfortable with how to break concepts down.
Yeah. And so that's, you know, and we're back now to, you know, this intervention.
Yes.
The, you know, tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3 kids in your class who haven't, you know, schools move too fast for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're, like you say, doing, you know, reasonably complex algorithms, you know, carrying and so on that requires place value knowledge. And they can do it. You know what I mean? They can parrot it and do the procedure, but they can make simple mistakes as well and not spot that they've made a mistake because they just, you know, started from the left instead of starting, you know, they started from the hundreds instead of starting from the units and they still follow the algorithm. They come up with a totally wrong answer, but they have no idea that it's wrong or why because, you know, I followed the algorithm.
Absolutely.
And so...
I'm just waving to kids outside. Sorry, couldn't help it. Keep going, Michael.
And so in that intervention, you're saying it's really about going back to those concrete concepts. Now, as a method? Is that what you're saying?
So what I'm saying, so within your tier 1,
Yep.
use manipulatives where possible.
Yeah.
Right.
So
everyone's got that common language.
So I always say, I had year 4, 5s last year, for example. We all use the manipulatives every time. We need to move away from the idea that manipulatives are only for children who struggle.
For little kids.
Yeah.
And by manipulatives, what kinds of things are you using?
That's a great question. So we use wooden blocks. Now, most people will think of Cuisenaire rods.
Yeah.
Similar to Cuisenaire, the difference is they have the markings in them. So Cuisenaire rods have no markings on them.
Yeah.
So, a number 5 is just a number 5 and
it's just a rod.
It's just a rod.
That's equal to the length of 5 small rods.
And it makes sense when you've got all of your rods lined up.
Yeah.
So these ones have the lines in there.
Yeah.
So should the children need to, they can actually count.
Yeah. So they're base 10
base
counters.
So
there's 1s, there's 2s, there's 3s,
there are.
As rods with little markers on them.
Yes, there are.
We've said the word rod a lot.
We have.
And anything else other than those?
So those are what we use like across our tier 1, and you can do most concepts with that.
Yep.
There are also, the other thing I would look at is the double-sided counters are really good.
The 2 colours?
The 2 colours,
Yeah.
I was watching a video. I can't remember the name, Graham something, Patterson maybe.
We'll put it in the show notes.
I was in the show notes. And he has some videos and he was explaining multiplication of fractions using the 2 coloured counters, and it was just such a great visual to explain. And I think often, particularly with fractions, we only connect it to shapes.
Yeah.
And so when you're then talking about fractions of numbers, which is where we use fractions more, apart from like soccer fields and netball, sports related things.
But I'm sick of pizzas
and sandwiches.
Yeah.
We need to understand fractions of numbers.
Yes.
And so that concept he did really well in this video, showing the 2-sided counters.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
So it's about real world mathematics.
Yes.
Right.
It's like, that's what the manipulatives are. It gets it out of that abstract number realm.
Yes.
And into actually physically making an addition.
Absolutely.
And lessons laid on working memory, because there it is.
What does 3 plus 2 actually mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Like, what are we talking about? What is, the conceptual understanding? So, and we find as well, children understand addition, for example, a lot more easily than subtraction, and they get multiplication a lot more easily than division.
Yeah.
So with the idea of using the bar model as a visual for the manipulatives, if you have a 5 bar and then you have a 2 bar and a 3 bar underneath it, you can see that 2 plus 3 will give me 5, but 3 plus 2 will give me 5 if I swap them round.
Yes.
But also 5 take away that 3, I'm left with 2. 5 take away 2 leaves me 3. So what we're doing is trying to make those connections really early so that we can see that we're actually talking about the same thing. It's just, two sides of the same coin. So we want to make those connections. But, if we were doing that with receptions, and so they get the idea of 1 more and 1 less because we could line the bars up.
Yep.
So they got that really quickly because they can count up and they can count down. And it's just so visual and so easy for them to get that idea.
Yeah.
1 more, 1 less, the language. We can't avoid this.
So vocabulary is so important in maths. And
Yeah.
I know that we have had this discussion lately because we've been picking out words that you can use for morphology in maths. One of my favorite things. So, I think like with literacy, is it magic E? Is it silent E? Is it, what are all the different
Split
jobs
vowel.
of E?
Yeah.
Split vowel. That same thing, having a consistent vocabulary across the school. Well, what are we calling this? What is it going to be? So
a consistent vocabulary, and I imagine a flexible vocabulary.
Yes.
Because, you think of addition. There are probably 50 ways to say add.
Yes.
Aren't they? Add,
Absolutely.
sum, plus, total, increase, combine.
Yes.
They all add, aren't they?
Yes.
And that can be extremely confusing.
Yes.
But so put all of that language in your scope and sequence and teach it in a strategic way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as a practical example, I was working with a year 3 kid just this week, And I said, today we're working on addition. And she said, I've never heard of that.
Wow.
What is addition?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, hold on a sec. No, I know what it is. It's this, isn't it? And she drew a division sign. Because addition kind of sounds like division.
Yes.
And then I said, oh, it's when you add this to this. And she said, oh, adding. Yeah, I know adding.
Yes.
But she knew what adding was, but she didn't know what addition was.
Did you take her straight to the word tracker?
No.
Oh, missed opportunity.
And so that's the kind of language confusion that's difficult for kids, isn't it?
Definitely.
And why that whole school consistency helps, because if one teacher is calling it this and another teacher calling it that from one year to the next, that could be quite confusing for a kid.
So that's why we've steered far away from our EDI structure. But when you do your lesson objective, whatever language and vocabulary is in there, you explain in your concept development. Yeah. So if there is words like fraction, even though, we assume that children understand what they mean, but I give the example of, we're learning to calculate the perimeter of regular shapes. Well, what is a regular shape? What am I actually talking about?
Yeah.
You know the word regular. You're very comfortable with that word, but what am I actually talking about? Perimeter is a great one. Peri means around. Meter means to measure. Perimeter means to measure around. Oh, I love morphology. Such a nerd.
But it provides a real hook for kids, doesn't it?
Exactly. And so every time I ask my children, well, what does peri mean? They could tell me peri means around, meter means to measure, you know. So the words that we use are very important, and we need to not assume that they understand things, because they may not understand it within the context that we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we want to break down those words, and that's why in an EDI lesson you do your lesson objective followed by your concept development. So that's where you're talking about specific vocabulary.
Yep.
And so that's when you can talk about, okay, well, here is addition. Here are some other words we may use. But you also want to be very specific about what is the focus of your lesson. Like, I'm not going to give them 10 questions with 10 different ways to say add together, find the sum of this, You could introduce it gradually with your language, because otherwise we're just a total overload. But
yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And so we've been talking about a typical lesson structure.
Yes.
So we had
we did. I think we started there.
That's where we started. And then we went into so we had the opening of the lesson, and then we had the revision.
Yes.
And then we were just then talking about explicit, here's the teaching point.
Teach first.
For this.
Yes.
What's next in the lesson?
Yeah. So exactly right. So you'd activate your prior knowledge, then you do your lesson objective, lesson intention, whatever, learning intention, whatever language you use.
And you will tell the students the learning intention?
And you will tell the students, and I do it in a way where I will read it to them, and we do, the tracking together. They will read it. I will get them to read it back to me, tell a partner. I always say to people, what you're doing in the lesson, it's not a secret. It's not for you to keep in your head. So it's not a surprise.
Great
for the
mystery
students.
reveal.
That's exactly. When they go, what are we doing today? We need to tell them.
Yeah.
Then you would do your concept development, which is breaking down any vocabulary or anything they will need for your lesson to understand. Then you go into the main part of your lesson, which is your I do, we do. I think most people listening to this podcast would be familiar with the I do, we do, you do concept.
Yeah, perhaps not parents.
Perhaps not. No, absolutely.
So I
that
think
was
it's
Anita Archer that
it's
first
a real
coined it.
teaching.
Yes.
Yes.
It's teaching terminology.
Yes, it is teaching
so it's
terminology.
probably worth just talking about what that means.
Yeah.
It's direct instruction terminology, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So, and Anita Archer, a wonderful lady.
Oh, and I just when you're talking about revision, when she said that as far as we know, no child's died from repetition yet.
Yes.
I thought,
Yes.
I think that's what she said. I just giggled.
Absolutely.
I love Anita.
So the idea is that you model first. So the I do is I, as the teacher, I will model a question that I want the skill that I want the children to know. I will talk out loud about my thinking, what points I need to remember. But I will also get the children to discuss, like, what steps did I take to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So we follow, or I'll come back to TAPL at
Yeah.
the end, because TAPL is a very important part of EDI. And then I will get the students to do a similar question, and I'm still there guiding them. And then it will come back to me, and I will do another question. Depending on my group, I might have something slightly different. So if I was doing perimeter, for example, I could change the unit of measurement.
So we're talking worked examples.
We're talking worked examples.
Gotcha.
That's exactly what we're doing. And then I will get them again to do another example, but I'm still guiding them. The EDI, they have a rule of 2 where they'll say they will do that twice. I prefer a rule of 3. I just find that I feel more comfortable in knowing where the children are at if I do 3. And a wonderful tip that I can give people is if you work from PowerPoints, I like to work for PowerPoints. It plans my thinking. It's also hitting your visual, your auditory,
multisensory.
your multisensory aspects as much as you can. And what you can do is just put some extra problems in there that you may not need, but if your children aren't getting it, we say keep calm and reteach. That's it. That's I took from Bill. I used that a lot last year. I had to keep calm. And so as a backup, if the children aren't getting it, have some extra there, because otherwise then you're thinking off the top of your head, and that's when we tend to get lost a little bit. So have some there that you may not need, but that's okay, because if you do need them, they're there and you can keep practicing. So, and as I always say to people as well, don't feel that you need to rush through. You get to where you get to. If they need more practice and more examples, then that's what you do.
That's diagnostic teaching.
You split your lesson in 2 and you think, okay, well, I'm going to have to do this over 2 lessons or 3 because actually this is a lot harder than I thought it would be. And this is what I always say as well. Like we move to the abstract far too quickly without that conceptual understanding. And some people, I think it was, quite big in education. The kids have to record their thinking. Actually, we don't. No. You will have lessons in junior primary where all they do is use the manipulatives. Yep.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Are we taking were we taking manipulatives and the concrete level away from kids too early?
I believe so, definitely.
Me
and
too.
I think again there's that misconception of, we need to move them on. We need to move them on. We need to make sure the conceptual understanding is there. Otherwise, you're not moving anything on.
What's the point?
That's right. There is no point.
I wonder where that comes from, because my view of it is, why would you ever take it away?
Well, yeah.
Because, like, if I have a conceptual understanding, I have the manipulatives available to me. If I don't need them, I won't use them. But if I'm really struggling, because we're, thinking now about kids who may have working memory difficulty or maybe living with dyscalculia, which we haven't spoken about yet, they may always need that scaffolding.
Yeah.
Yes.
They may always need to be able to either draw a picture or have some counters or something next to them so that they can free up that working memory and they can quickly go, I don't get this. And they can quickly model it themselves with the manipulatives and go, now I get it.
And that's why it's important that we don't view manipulatives as just a tool for kids who struggle.
Yeah.
Manipulatives is for all the children.
Yes.
And it's to introduce the concept. So it's, I think that there is a bit of a view, particularly when you go up in high year levels, that we only get, the counters or whatever out for the kids who are struggling.
And it's not just to teach it. Sometimes you lose the picture when you're doing something. Michael, when you got out that pair of plastic scales and those beams and you showed me how to teach a kid to solve for X, right? Which is kind of solving for X is year 7, year 8 maths.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, year 7.
Year 7. Oh, wow, I'd never thought about it that way. It was so important for me. So I immediately went and bought a pair of plastic scales.
And making it concrete.
Yeah, yes.
Because that's getting highly conceptual, isn't it, then, where we're talking about X.
Yeah.
Representing a number and, that's very much about, that algebra stuff is almost always just done purely at that conception level.
Yes, that's right.
Just presented with numbers and letters.
And why do I have to do the same on both sides?
Yeah, why?
Yeah.
And making it more than just following the algorithm, because then as soon as you're presented with something different or something you haven't seen before, then you're lost.
Yeah.
Because now I don't know where to start.
Yes. And when we did the Ron Yoshimoto training, we had little cards for addition and subtraction and equals, and we used the blocks in place of the numbers. And he had just a cup, basically, that you could cover one of the blocks with. And, that's very simple algebra, which if done in the right way can be done with with, junior primary children.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, well, what am I trying to work out? Well, I was under the cup here.
Yep.
How am I going to use what I've got to work that out?
Yeah. And I think what you were talking about before of teachers, being in their year level and not necessarily thinking about what's gone before and what is to come. I've got an advantage because I'm not in a year level. I can just meet a kid and work with them where they're at.
Yes.
But I'm always thinking about, like you just said, when I'm introducing addition, I actually add in some pre-algebra thinking. Like, we don't do it conceptually, but I give them little problems to solve. Bill was talking about a weights thing and, I just recently did a session with someone on equals. We were talking about what does equals mean? And interestingly, from that level that you were talking about that concrete understanding of what equals is, when I first asked her what equals was, she genuinely thought that those little symbols were just a literacy device to separate the answer from the problem.
Oh.
Because she said
thought.
Otherwise it would just be a big string of numbers and I wouldn't know what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
So she thought that the plus symbol and the minus symbol and stuff were kind of like a hyphen or a dash.
Wow.
And the equals is just there to keep the answer apart.
That's what I thought.
Because otherwise, she explained it to me, we were doing like 8 plus 2 or something like that, and the answer is 10. And she said, well, if I didn't have the equals there, it would be 210.
Wow.
And so she thought this just helps it separate.
Yeah.
So if that's what you think equals is,
what a misconception.
and then you come to algebra,
Yes.
well, that's a big mess in your head of like,
it is.
not understanding that equals means both these sides have to be the same.
And as well, like, when is equals actually explained?
No, and that was
Yes.
and it wasn't to me, and
it's a big concept.
And
It
you
is.
just articulated. Now, I eventually worked out, but quite late in my development, that equals just means same as.
Yeah, okay.
So when I was,
But same as what?
well,
It's more complicated than you think. Sorry, I
kind of
didn't.
is,
Yeah, come on, sorry.
Well, so when I was getting maths tutoring in high school, and the maths tutor's doing his best to use the scales analogy, I realised what was holding me back is I didn't have a truly conceptual understanding of what equals is about. Yeah.
Yeah, and
As one of those assumed
Yes,
things, isn't
that's
it?
right.
We
Yep.
just assume that kids understand what equals means.
Yes.
But it's about that vocab and being really explicit.
Yeah.
and
when
it's
you're teaching.
quite complicated.
And the other thing as well is when we look at an addition equation, they are so used to seeing 2 plus 3 equals 5. And with my class last year, I flipped it around and went, well, is this the same if I do 5 equals 2 plus 3? And they were like, no.
Yep.
So again,
Yeah.
it comes back to that. And so then we did work around, well, actually, it means that, both sides will work out to be the same. Is that 5? Is that 5?
Yeah.
So, what does that mean? And how do we flip it around? So sometimes they're so used to seeing it in only one way
Yeah.
that they don't realize that there are other ways to
Yeah,
represent.
that
Yes.
flexibility of
Yes.
thinking.
One of the best things I saw was when we were at Bentley West years ago, I saw Dave Morcunis and Michael McKinnon, and they had a PowerPoint called Tables Turnarounds. And it was the transitions had worked in the PowerPoint, so to go 3 multiplied, or 3 times 5 is 15, and then the 15 would physically move. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3.
Yes. Yeah.
And the kids would see that moving, and that was so powerful.
Yes.
I thought such a simple thing on a PowerPoint. And shout out to the Bentley West folks. And Mork, I know you're over at where is he at? Brandon Park now.
Brandon
Yeah,
Park.
but we love you, Mork, and we love you, Bentley West.
And it's such a great scaffolding for division, which is difficult.
That's
to know
right.
that it's the inverse of multiplication.
And this is
Yes.
where, that's right, this is where the manipulatives are so handy, because I'm working with a student here at the moment and, explaining that division works out exactly the same. I'm just looking at it in a different way.
Yep.
So we went through, 3 times tables, and I think we did like 3 times 4, and then showed her how 4 times 3 is the same as well. And that's something that we sort of, I think, take for granted as adults. And again, it's that assumed knowledge, or,
Yes.
it's the same answer, so they should see that, it's the same amount. But when you actually take manipulatives and put them on top And you go, oh, well, that's exactly the same. It's
Yes.
just counting in a different number. It's really powerful. And then taking that 12 and saying, well, if I take 12 and I'm making groups of 4, like how many groups do I have? But if I'm making groups of 3, how many do I have? And for her, you can see when kids make that connection in their heads, you see it instantly, don't you? And she was like, is that all it is? And I was like, that's all it is.
What a great thing. Really? Is that all it is?
Yeah. I remember teaching a child to read the clock once and, and he looked at it and I was like, this is this and this is this. And he's like, so you're telling me like, if I do this, this is the time. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, is that all?
Is that all?
Is that all?
You know what that is? That is excellent teaching. And every bloomin' teacher, primary teacher, when you just said teaching kids, the clock went, heads went down everywhere because they always forget from year level to year level.
Tricky.
I will say as well, I mean, obviously one-on-one teaching makes things much easier.
It does.
As opposed to being in a classroom. So, but that's why, and that's why I developed the scope and sequences for the whole school was, because when I taught year 1, I did think to myself, okay, well, what did they come from? What did they do?
Yeah.
And where are they going? So I developed a scope and sequence like for year 1 and then did reception in year 2 and then just kind of kept going. So
that sounds like absolute gold to me because the biggest problem I had when I started tutoring, because my daughter was diagnosed with dyscalculia and I couldn't find a tutor anywhere.
Yes.
And look, I've never really been very good at maths, but I was okay at maths. Like I didn't have maths anxiety kind of thing. I thought, yeah, I could do this. So I started tutoring her and kind of at that point realised how complicated it all was. And I looked at the curriculum and it wasn't very helpful.
No.
It's fairly loose.
Regarding
It is.
it tells me what I have to teach, but there's no clues as to how or what sequence to do it in.
Yes.
And I reckon I went on I think it probably took me more than a year to find a sequence. Now, I compare that to literacy and I think, I look at the Playberry program or any number of literacy programs out there and they are structured, sequenced, fine-grained. You teach this, you teach this, you teach this, and you look at the logic of it and it's brilliant and everything builds on the previous step. And I could not, I think even to this day, find anything like that for maths that says, okay, in an intervention situation, you've got a kid living with dyscalculia, so we're not talking about the typical maths difficulties. This is someone living with dyslexia. This is someone who, has that kind of
fundamental issues, understanding magnitude. And
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so they need a sequence. You need to have this tiny, fine-grained step-by-step that takes them from where do you start? And with what I do now, I start with what's a number. Like, what is a number?
Yes.
And that's actually quite a big concept, because it's actually a constructed thing. Getting a kid to think about what is a number is quite big. But if you've never done that and you struggle with what numbers are, you need to be explicitly taught what a number is.
And how is a number different to a digit?
Or a numeral.
Or a numeral. That's right.
So, and this is where,
And what do
maths
numbers
is
do?
vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to pull on the first thread here is, okay, why aren't we making mathematics curriculum as explicit as a really good structured literacy curriculum?
Yeah, or at least have an intervention that's that explicit.
Yeah. And I got, again, Ben Jensen on the ERRR podcast saying, you know what lifts teacher efficiency better than good teacher training? Giving them a really good curriculum and a good resource.
Yep.
Not to say that resources will replace teacher training ever, but it makes sense when you were just saying about if you give me a really clear roadmap that breaks the teaching and the sequence up really carefully and cleverly, you're going to make me a good teacher from the get-go automatically.
Right. And if I'm not confident with maths, as we're saying many people are not,
That's right.
then you only have to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of the kid.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can trust the sequence and you can trust the program because somebody really clever has thought it through and said, hey, follow this sequence.
An expert
and the kids
has
are
put
going
it
to
together.
get the knowledge that they need.
Yes.
And it's diagnostic teaching. It's built-in revision and review, just like literacy, but
Yeah.
I'm yet to find a maths equivalent to that.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll do it. We'll do it in play very soon.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yes. As Oka Education is a really good website to start with.
Yep.
It was made by Reed Smith, I believe, heads that one.
Yeah.
So that's a really good place for people to start.
Brilliant.
As some simple stuff. But, the other thing that I would say as well is, where's the assessments?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I struggle to find schools that are doing really good assessments that can help you work out exactly what your children need.
Yeah.
So when you talk about literacy, again,
There's
there
a
are things-
smorgasbord of assessments.
exactly.
aren't
It's overwhelming.
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
right.
for-
It's about
for
which one
literacy.
do I choose? There's so much choice.
Exactly. But when you're talking about maths, it becomes a lot more limited. So,
Yeah. So I use an assessment developed by Stephen Chin, who's
Yep.
very well known,
Lovely
dyscalculia
man.
expert, and I'll have to update this in the show notes because I'm really bad with names, but I think it's called More Trouble with Maths,
Sounds right.
and it's a book of maths assessment. And so it has some normed assessments in there, and they're really kid-friendly. So like there's a 60-second addition and subtraction test that has normed data. So even a kid that has a lot of anxiety can do a 60-second test.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just test those basic facts. There's kind of a longer form test, which I would only use for older kids because that's a bit too intimidating for little kids. But then what I really love, and this is what I use in my first session with a kid, he's got a whole bunch of informal activities that you can do with a kid that are really well thought through that show you exactly where the holes in their knowledge are.
Oh, I need to get that.
And they're simple things. I'm not aware of all that many
No.
others out there,
Yeah,
but that's something that would be classroom friendly,
Yeah.
I reckon, to assess a kid.
Just for listeners, we did do an episode. It was our episode 3 called "What
Yep.
is Dyscalculia?"
Yes.
So if you haven't listened to that and you want to know more about dyscalculia, head back to
Yeah,
that.
because we're kind of just jumping into assuming
Yeah,
people know what it is,
that's right.
don't we?
But it is a developmental disorder
Yeah.
in
And if-
maths number in particular,
That's
isn't
right.
it? So,
yeah, absolutely. So, but I would also say that when you're within a classroom, there are so many children at this stage who would tick the boxes of dyscalculia, but it would be instructional.
Yes, they are what we call instructional casualties,
Yes.
and we get them in literacy as well.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. For those kids, what you're talking about with manipulatives is utterly essential.
Yes.
This explicit instruction and working with manipulatives, there's no way around it.
No.
Just like kids living with dyslexia, you got to go back to have that very fine grain, and like I was saying, I start with what is a number?
Yeah.
And I would say as well, your manipulatives, we're talking about cognitive load, don't have a massive variety of things.
No.
We don't need teddy bears to do this concept and, flip tiles to do this concept. And that's what I love about the manipulatives that we use.
Yeah.
That, let's say Cuisinart rods so people have a visual. You can use the same manipulatives for so many concepts.
Yeah.
Yes.
We want to lessen the load.
Yes.
Yes.
And the other thing I would say as well is, we can't assume that kids will make concept connections. So 1 year level, you may be talking about skip counting, and then the next year level is multiplication.
Yep.
But unless you make that connection between why that's skip counting and why that's multiplication, then we can't assume that kids will just pick that up.
Yeah.
So I had year 1, 2s, and the year 1 curriculum was skip counting. Year 2 was introducing multiplication. So when I broke it down and I was like, here's your skip counting, here's your multiplication, a lot of you have heard of timetables. You've got older brothers and sisters. This is what it is. Again, I got, oh, is that all? That's all.
Yeah.
That's all it is. That's all we're talking about. So we need to be, again, really developmental, really progressive in making connections between topics, because otherwise these children who struggle are going to see addition as one thing, see subtraction as something else, see every concept that you're doing as so individual when all numbers are connected. We're just using them in different ways.
That's
Liana,
right.
you
You have
just-
really got to join those dots.
Yeah.
for
You
them.
do. And you just, a penny dropped for me when you said you don't need 58. You didn't say 58, but you don't need
Yeah.
various manipulatives. if you have teddy bears for this and counters for that, that is extraneous cognitive load.
Yeah.
That is creating a problem, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're talking about keeping our manipulatives to a bare minimum, as well as making sure our language is taught in a sequential way. So we're very cognizant of what we call what. I just got a quick story. I was working with a student once and he hit year 7 and his teacher was all of a sudden insisting on a different looking division frame when the division algorithms were done. You have one with the curve and the straight line on top, and he just wanted a right angle. Right. And this threw poor old Josh, knocked him sideways. And number one, it highlighted to me that like a lot of kids, Josh's understanding of what division is was probably shaky. But this teacher was insisting on this. And I was thinking, isn't that interesting? So he goes from year 6 where the division frame looks like this into year 7. I think schools need to be making decisions about things like that as well.
And I think that's a part of the bigger conversation that needs to happen, because there does need to be more consistency across the school. Because I think, in a lot of schools, it's just you are in your classroom. If you've got a team around you, great, but you're just kind of doing your own thing, and there's not those bigger conversations around, well, what are you doing here and what are you doing here and how do we tie that together? But it also comes to, I think we need to prioritize, like, what's important. Is the shape of the bracket the most important thing that we need?
Yeah.
Is that something we're going to get hung up on? And I know there's discussions around, when you're doing times tables, like which number should come first, the table that you're doing or the other number. Yeah. And I remember I asked Ron Yoshimoto and he was like, well, like, is that something we want to get hung up on? They need to know that it works both ways. Yeah. So, like, what is our priority here?
And that's thank you for that pushback on that, because that is important as well. What do we get our knickers in a knot about? Yeah. What matters? So if this kid's understanding of division was solid, would that have mattered?
No.
So yeah.
And I think we do need to show them that it comes in different ways. It can look like this. It can look like this. That's important.
Yeah, it is. They need to have that flexibility. They need to have that knowledge.
That's right, exactly. So if it looks like this, I know that it means this, and this is how I'm going to work it out.
Yeah.
But, are we going to get hung up on, tiny little, how much of a curve there is? Or
And for that kid, that created a piece of extraneous cognitive load that tipped him over the edge, but that was symptomatic of some deeper issues, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the thing, I guess, if you struggle and you have a way that's working for you, to then perhaps be told, we need to make some changes here. It would be a total cognitive load issue.
Yeah.
Because then what are they then focusing on? They're focusing on the operation that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
Or what it looks like.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, spot on.
So we've been talking about schools and how do schools, provide the best environment for kids. Yeah. So we've got, if I'm getting the formula right, you're using explicit direct instruction as a lesson kind of overall strategy for
lesson structure.
For your lesson structure.
Absolutely.
You've got a set scope and sequence that everyone understands and is following in the school. You are ensuring that manipulatives are used when all the concepts are introduced so that kids have a very solid understanding, not just a conceptual understanding of maths. You have a set of language.
Yes. So with the scope and sequence, there is a vocabulary list as well for each part that we're teaching, the language that goes with it.
Yep. And then we've spoken about the other barriers for teachers, which you mentioned is a lack of professional development, because, many teachers don't feel comfortable with maths because it is, as we've talked about, a bit of a cultural thing, and it is easy to kind of, put maths to the side and focus on something else.
Yeah.
And so we probably haven't got time to go into it here, but in the show notes we'll put, you mentioned a couple of professional development opportunities, but there are actually quite a few out there that are easily accessible, so that as a team, the teachers in the school can be on the same page do professional development, and kind of develop that shared understanding of this is how we're doing this across the school.
And that's the thing. It's probably a case of, teachers, they just don't know where to go, where to look.
Yeah. And that all that stuff lowers curriculum variance. It makes sure that which classroom a kid gets isn't a lottery.
Yes.
Or such a lottery.
Yeah. And then having a bit of a strategy for dealing with kids that need extra support. So having small group or one-on-one. It sounds to me like that's still a bit of a work in progress, not for you, but for the whole system, in regard to maths.
Yes.
We're probably getting better at it with literacy.
Yeah, definitely.
But in regard to maths, we're probably not quite there yet because I suppose as a system, we haven't got the fundamentals in place, which I think is probably part of what you're trying to do with your world tour and going and seeing the best practice.
Oh,
yeah,
by the way,
absolutely.
So
can we
you
get
can
you back
bring
after that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. No, it should be good.
Yeah, so a system that's built in it, and we're really not there yet, are we?
No.
And it's kind of now, I think, a little unfairly left up to teachers to manage that whole thing in their class.
I hope you're listening, Akara.
And if you're not strong with, you're not going to get much help from the curriculum.
No.
We're not going to be able to solve that here today, other than say there are resources out there. And often, as I found, it is just a matter of not looking in the right spots, knowing where to look or what acronyms to use when you're searching. You kind of have to know enough to find and sift through good resources. So hopefully we can help with that with the show notes and at least give people a spot to get started if they're interested.
Yeah.
And then what we haven't spoken about yet is the parent. And so as a parent, I'm kind of getting a sense here that it would be helpful if you're a parent with the capacity to kind of fill a little bit of a gap here. I know, sad to say, but I had to do it with my kid living with dyscalculia. So it'd be really interesting, I think, to talk about what could parents do at home to really support their kids. Because I think there are simple, fun things that you can do at home that build this number sense.
Yeah.
We talk about dyscalculia and this lack of number sense.
Let's start with number then.
Yeah. So what sort of stuff can parents be doing to support their kids?
The first thing I always suggest is play games. So if you play something like Snakes and Ladders, for example, you're getting one-to-one correspondence when, you're moving your piece up. You're getting supertizing with your dice, so then being able to recognize the numbers without having to count the dots on the dice. You are getting them to look at an initial number line to 10 and then to 100 as well. So then they're seeing the patterns in numbers. They're engaging with numbers. I would also, any kind of dice game is great. You think of Trouble.
Yep.
Well, that we used to play a lot as kids, right?
I'll give you trouble.
I am aging myself
with the
here.
Pop-O-Matic.
Yeah, the Pop-O-Matic. So exactly that noise, right? So you're getting that one-to-one correspondence when you're moving your pieces, but you're also then getting that, okay, well, how many more do I need to get here? So then they're starting to engage again with those numbers in a different way. So now I need this many more. So you're thinking just beyond like me moving my piece. Now we're thinking strategically.
Yeah.
And cards. Cards are, you're also supertizing there with cards and simple card games and, even just things like Go Fish because, I'm engaging with numbers, I'm seeing them. And I think we also need to remember when we use maths in our everyday lives as adults, it's usually problem solving. It's very practical. We don't do equations for the fun of it. Some of us might, but
And if you do, we're not judging you.
But when we are, looking through a catalog, we're shopping, we're using money, just having those conversations around, I've got $5. That's going to cost me $2.70. How could I work out how much?
Yeah, involving your kids in those things.
Just the conversation where you can. And it's interesting because kids tend to understand money quite quickly. I'm not sure why because there's less and less of it around that they actually see. But for some reason, they just seem to get it. But in my experiences anyway.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, not me.
No,
but maybe it's the kids I see that have no idea about money.
So and that
or what
anything
anything
motivation
is worth.
to get it. Maybe that's just it.
I'm not kidding. We play shops.
Yeah.
And I bring out items from my pantry.
Yeah.
And I get them to rank them in how expensive they think they
Yes.
are. And they have no idea.
Yeah.
They have no idea
No.
how much a tin of baked beans is or
You're
anything.
doing like a supermarket sweep.
Yeah.
Michael's the new Price is Right. Michael Turpey.
But these kind of skills,
Yes, yeah.
they're real life skills,
They
aren't
are,
they? And
yes.
they're math skills because
Yes.
we're talking about value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I see this as a precursor to working on place value.
Yes.
You have to understand value, to try understand what place value is.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so those early skills are easy to do at home,
Yeah.
Yeah.
aren't they? You
Yes.
could, in a supermarket, give your kid a $10 budget and say, I need this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, give them the calculator. Give them a calculator.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Give them
right.
a total as you go.
Exactly.
It's not about having to do it in
No.
your head. It's just about
No.
getting
Yeah.
the concept across.
Oh, we're putting that back on the shelf. You're going to have to minus that
Minus.
from the total.
Yes. You see, estimation is a really important skill very early on. So even, how many steps will it take from here to the curb?
Yeah.
So, just those basic,
Yeah.
or how many do you think here? And engaging in those conversations. But I would say card games, dice games as a starter as well. And I think we've probably moved away from that a little bit with the board games.
We
but
have.
pull them out. They're in the cupboard.
Well, that was exactly my thought then, because we're talking about kind of old-fashioned
Yeah.
approach, aren't we? Because
Yes.
mostly it would be an iPad or an
Yeah.
electronic device.
Mm.
And I'm sure that those games exist on there, but we're
Yeah, but
talking
I
the
don't think they're as
multi-sensory
effective.
approach.
I
No,
need to
definitely.
be. I need to be putting my hotel on Mayfair.
Yeah. How many of us learnt about money through Monopoly?
Monopoly.
Mm.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
right.
Budgeting and paying for things.
Yeah,
And I need
yeah.
this much, so how much more do I need?
Yeah.
The game
Yeah.
of life.
The game.
Yeah. and kids love games.
Yes.
And they can be really simple.
Yes,
Oh.
exactly.
In my 20s, when I decided I was going to be a gajillionaire, which I'm not, Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quote. What was his game called? It's a great game on cash flow something, cash flow quadrant. Anyway, there's me in my mid-20s going, right, need to understand things like internal rate of return on investment properties. Thanks, Kiyosaki. You're a beauty.
So you do equations for fun.
Well, yeah, and I've absolutely butchered the name of the game. It'll come to me. Yeah, no, kind of.
Yeah, so I think simple games, even something as simple as Snap,
Yes.
is getting with cards.
Yep.
Is getting kids used to spotting those patterns and seeing that these two match. And we
Yes.
it's an equals game,
Yes.
isn't it? This
Exactly.
is equal, this is not equal. All those really basic fundamental skills.
So parents, you don't have to be a maths teacher.
No.
There's a lot that can be done.
No, so we could put a list of fun games to play at home.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
There are some really simple ones.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
I play, I call it pig, but I don't know if it's called that. But, with kids, they start off with simple dice and we kind of ramp it up. I always play a game at the end of the session. But it's that simple game where you roll a dice, say it's a normal dice.
Or is
and
it a die?
You have to add your total up. So, I roll a 6,
Yeah.
I roll a 4, so now I'm on 10. I roll a 3, now I'm on 13. And it's a race to, say, 50. If you roll a 1, your score goes back to 0 if you haven't banked your score. So I can keep rolling and I can get to 15 and I can go, okay, I'm going to bank it, and I write 15 down and then it's my turn. If I keep rolling and get a 1, then I get 0 for that
Oh,
score.
put that up.
So it's like a race
Yeah.
to 50.
I want to play that.
You just
Yeah.
need one die,
I
and that's practicing.
think it's one dice,
One
plural
dice.
die.
Oh, one die.
Is it? I never just can't work it out.
That's practicing all those skills. They're
Yes.
having to add. They're having to think about how far to the total.
Does
When
anyone
should
know-
I stop?
Yeah, that's in one of Paul
It's a
Swan's maths books.
precursor for probability.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a whole lot just rolled up into
Yes.
a pencil
Yeah.
and a dice.
Yes.
And kids that I work with play that forever.
Yeah.
Like it's thrilling. It's
Yeah.
so much fun.
Yes.
And that's just there's tons of things like that
Well,
that you could
even
do with kids.
Something like Yahtzee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
When you're working out what patterns you've got,
Yep.
and what you need,
Dominoes.
So
Yeah.
exactly.
And if you have a kid really struggling going between fraction and decimal, there's this great game called Decimat.
Oh, yeah.
DECIMAT, which I
Yeah.
use with my kids as well. I know it's a bit further up, but
yeah.
gee, that gets kids somehow over a massive hump. I find. I think it's just the practice and repetition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Liana McCurry, it has been fantastic. And I think we're going to, if you'll come back, right, if you don't come back from Estonia and your Churchill Fellowship and all those other countries, an absolute celebrity already, and you still remember the small people like us, would you come back?
Absolutely.
And share with us what you learned about maths intervention?
Yeah, that would be great.
Fabulous.
So helpful and such a wealth of knowledge. And I really hope that what we've talked about can be helpful for people, because I know it is really difficult. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Michael.
Brilliant. I love sitting next to you and having these chats.
Even when I say cognitively overloading extraneous random stuff.
I love that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Liana. It's so nice of you to give us your time. We're sitting in a meeting room at Salisbury Primary School. It's great to be where the action is. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We really hope you've got something out of this. As usual, we'll put as much as we can in the show notes, which you can find at discastia.com. You can follow us on social media. We love it when you ask questions and make comments, because it just means that we can target what we're talking about. Or if you've got suggestions for future shows, we're very welcome to that. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening.
Thank you.